Welcome back everyone. Time to go ahead and talk about another iPhone that honestly is a little bit too old, but in my opinion, is probably one of the most impactful iPhones that have ever came out, in my humble opinion. Now, I'm not going to link an iPhone 4S in the description. I really don't think anybody should be using it as a main device, but I will leave a couple other iPhones that I would recommend this year, more of the budget use type of iPhones that you can find on Amazon. So those will be linked down below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, the reason I think the iPhone 4S is one of the most impactful iPhones ever is because of, going from the 3GS, or the iPhone 4 more so is the most impactful one, but, I would kind of group these two together. These phones had glass backs, flat sides, beautiful panels on the front. And when you look at the iPhone 12s, glass backs, flat sides, beautiful display on the front, there's so many similarities between the iPhone 4 and 4S to the iPhone 12. Now, the 4S was, I think, not a humongous upgrade from the iPhone 4, but I still think this device deserves so much hype, and even the fact that we're still talking about it these many years later is surely a sign of how impactful this phone was for sure. So the front of the iPhone 4S has that 3.5-inch IPS panel, and as everyone pretty much knows at this point, it wasn't that, it's not a good panel anymore, but at that time, it was actually a pretty decent panel. The resolution was 640p, I guess that's one way to put it. It wasn't a crazy good resolution, but at that time, it was a decent display. Now, one of the biggest problems of the iPhone at that time was definitely the size of the devices. I don't think everyone was super excited about the iPhones only being one size. Nowadays, we have such a huge list of the display sizes that we can get. Unfortunately, at this time, we only had that 3.5-inch model, but I still don't think it's really that big of a problem. And the panel itself really now isn't even that bad, which is pretty surprising. So in terms of the panel, in the front, obviously it has a lot of bezel on it, but, I think it's totally okay for a 2011 device, which is turning 10 years old this year. Now on the bottom, we have the headphone jack and the, 30-pin connector, which is the older iPhone charger. And on the back, we have that glass back, which still, in my opinion, is pretty beautiful. I mean, when you hold this phone, does it feel like a 10-year-old phone? Not at all. This phone doesn't even feel like a 2-year-old phone. I mean, how many phones that are coming out nowadays that don't even have glass backs? We had the Note 20, the Galaxy S20 is set to not even have a glass back, but the iPhone 4S from 2011 has a full-on glass back, aluminum sides. This thing feels so premium, it's so insane. Now, on the top of that glass back, we do have that single camera setup, which I'll go ahead and hit on right now. It is a single 8-megapixel sensor, which is kind of funny because we share that 8-megapixel sensor from the 4S to the iPhone 6. And it's a single camera setup, no telephoto lens, no ultra wide, no nothing like that. But I mean, for a 10-year-old device, it's pretty expected. I will tell you, the fact that this phone even turns on, the fact that it still has some capability is good enough for me. You can shoot photos and videos on it. You can do 1080p videos on the back, which I think is pretty cool still. Now, I would not recommend anybody using this phone to, take super important photos in your life. But if you have to use it, then go for it. I think for a 10-year-old phone, it's actually pretty decent. I obviously would not recommend people using it if they don't have to, but it still turns on, it still has some capability, and I actually want to try something. I want to take photos from these type of phones and edit them up and see if you're able to see whether it's a good photo or a bad photo, or even maybe compare an edited, iPhone 4S photo to an iPhone 12 photo and see if you're able to tell the differences. But definitely when it comes down to it, this photo isn't that great anymore, and I honestly, the back camera is not something to hype about anymore. It does have a front camera though, which is VGA quality, which is great. You can do, video calls and FaceTimes and stuff like that. And I think it's more so not even the quality, but the fact that this phone had a front camera in 2011 is pretty insane to me. So in terms of the camera setup, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, moving on to the software side of things, this phone, when it first came out, obviously, it came out a while ago. It did start off with iOS 5. Right now, as most of you guys know, it's unsupported, but it ended up getting an update on iOS 9. So it went from iOS 5 to iOS 9, and it actually did end up getting some updates in the recently, I think in 2019, it ended up getting some updates. So that in and of itself, as I said before, is another huge aspect of this device. It doesn't necessarily excuse some of the problems of it, but I think the software isn't necessarily a huge issue when it comes down to this whole entire device, in my opinion. So in terms of the software side, obviously it's outdated, but I don't think it's really that bad, to be completely honest. So in terms of software, that pretty much covers it up. Now, performance wise, this phone does have the Apple A5 chip inside of it, a dual core CPU with a half a gigabyte of RAM. So it has 512 megabytes of RAM. Now, is it a lot of RAM? Absolutely not. I'm pretty sure everyone knows in this day and age that it's a very small amount of RAM to have on this type of device. But I don't even think this phone is that bad of a performing phone. When you look at the fact that this thing is 10 years old, you can probably pick this phone up for like, $12 or $20 nowadays. Like, it really isn't that bad of a device in my opinion. Now, I think the biggest aspect and one of the areas that actually does surprise me in a little bit would probably come in the form of the smoothness factor. The performance of this phone and the smoothness factor is actually pretty decent. Now, that's not saying anything. I mean, I'm not trying to say this phone is a great performing phone by any means, but the fact that it does have some capability in the smoothness factor is something that I actually really do like about it. But with that being said, there are some caveats, as I've stated before. I think that app opening speeds obviously are very, very slow. It's extremely slow when it comes down to actually opening up apps and all that other stuff. And also, to be honest, when it comes down to even playing games and, opening up Snapchat and stuff like that, some apps aren't even being able to be open on these type of softwares anymore because it's very outdated. When you have Real Racing 3 and other games you try to play, this isn't necessarily a super compatible phone with those apps either. So you're going to have to download super old versions of those games, or you're just not going to be able to download them at all because, like I stated before, iOS 9 is many, many years old, and most manufacturers just don't want to support their apps on a game, on a software that's completely outdated. So you're going to run into a lot of problems. Even if the performance on this phone was perfect, again, you're going to run into another problem when it comes down to app supportability. So I think in terms of performance, nobody's planning on using this phone anymore. But as I said before, I still have to give a lot of credit to this device just because of the fact that it can still turn on, the fact that it can still do a lot of other capability when it comes down to it. So I think in terms of that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the performance standpoint. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this phone, when it first came out, had a 1,432 milliamp hour battery. I really don't think anybody's using this type of phone anymore. So I would probably say the battery life wasn't even that bad when it first came out, as far as I know. Again, I didn't use it when it first came out. I had like I didn't even have a phone. I think I had like some random Java phone when it first came out. But this phone, as of right now, is probably very, very basic. It's probably not going to last you that long. But again, maybe it will. I could be totally wrong. So in terms of the battery life, that's probably how it covered up there. Now, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, is the iPhone 4S still worth it in 2021? Well, let me just go ahead and tell you some pros. I think that's the best way to kind of start off. But even before that, let me just say, this phone, obviously nobody's going to be using it anymore. It's not worth it to use as a main device, but I think as a collector's item, it still has a lot of value. I think if you're planning on using this phone to actually like use it as a collector's item to, resell it in the future, this phone has a lot of value in that sense. But with that being said, there are some pros for it still for sure, even beyond than just keeping it for a collector's item. The screen of it is actually not that bad. The build quality of this phone is really, really good, surprisingly well. As I said before, there's a lot of phones that came out even last year that are budget tier phones that don't even feel as good as this device. You have software that was supported for a while. I guess 2019 was the last time they got an official update, but that was a pretty long time ago. You still have, a pretty okay performing phone, I guess. You have the Apple ecosystem, I guess. But again, these are considering the fact that it's a 10-year-old phone. The performance is not good on this phone. The cameras aren't good on this phone. The software isn't good on this phone. But the fact that it's a 10-year-old phone, that is kind of what gives it an edge because it is kind of a historical device when it comes down to it. So I think that's pretty much how I would kind of sum it up. It's a beautiful phone in terms of the history. I probably wouldn't recommend anybody using it, but I think at the end of the day, it's a pretty good phone when it comes down to it. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys want to pick up any phones that I mentioned earlier on this video or whatever phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. If you guys have any other questions, leave those in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it'd be so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly, everything else. I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.